recording going, and we are at our first DEIJB conversations in the year 2026. And we'll be starting with context is what. The last couple of years, I started with context is everything. And so I've altered the title a bit. Context is what? Don't put me in a box. And it's my favorite way to just start this ongoing conversation of diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and belonging, because I think it's so important for us to always hold really near in our awareness our own context, our own social identifiers. Because that is how we continuously cultivate compassion and opportunities for connection in our own being. And the more finally skilled we are at that, the more skilled we are then socially as we interface and interact with other people. I am going to fold into this conversation, which was not my plan yesterday, but has become my plan today, based on just a couple of text messages I received for support. What happened yesterday with the killing of the woman in Minneapolis by an ICE agent, a federal ICE agent? Um, because all of what is happening with ICE is so core to these conversations of DEIJB. And, and not to mention or not to forget that even with that, part of the same administrative tactic is to remove the programs that would cultivate competency around these topics. So I think it's even more important for us to get really specific. We'll not be getting political, but I think as spiritual leaders, that it's important for us to take time to really be present with each other and what may be happening in your own communities. Renee, the woman who was killed, was actually from Kansas City. She just relocated to Minneapolis not very long ago. So it feels, and as part of the queer community, so it feels very close. And I will just share that for me. I have not been attending protests or vigils in the last year for anything related to ICE activity. Um, and that's just for my, honestly, straightforwardly, admittedly, my own fear. I don't want to be hauled off. I don't want to be beat or worse. Um, and I know that also because I have that level of fear that it's as important, if not more important, for me to spend that time doing my spiritual work of staying grounded. And that I think it's okay, especially for people of color, to take a seat and rest and let other people with privilege and power, take up the mantle and really lead these conversations. So I've been sort of living in that. But yesterday I got my own clarity. I was invited to a prayer vigil this Saturday for Renee, and I will be attending that. And then this morning I received a very lengthy text message from a person here in Kansas City who's a queer woman with a wife and a 6-year-old. And she was like, I am shaken. I could see me and my spouse at one of these events being like a responsible observer. And I could see that if an ICE agent pulled their gun out, that I would try to drive away, not to cause more harm or threat, but to because I'm afraid of being shot. And it's just like what, has lost their own sort of ground of being. And so and was asking for prayer and just and words and support. And so I think that this is a real moment in our nation, a real moment. So I just want to kind of, before we get into my slides and my presentation, give space for any of you to speak into how things are moving in your own heart, in your own being, if there's already things that are showing up in your community. Just give space for us. And I will say too, if you want me to pause the recording, I can do that. Or if you want me to leave it rolling, I can do that too. Does anyone want me to pause it? Okay, then I'll leave it. Go ahead, Deva.
I'm so glad you brought this up. My heart is so heavy. Seeing it I don't watch television news. I read news in the morning typically, but I did see a number of videos. I had not, in my lifetime, the first video I saw was George Floyd.
Mhm.
And so it brought that up for sure. And I, I, I'm really scared for our country. I'm scared for people in our country. I mean, I'm not going to go into all my thoughts about immigration, except that immigration has happened as long as humans have been alive. Um, and I, there's something very personal about this Renee Good. And I'm so struck by her last name,
Mhm.
and so she is now a martyr.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of response to that for which I'm grateful, but it never, ever, ever should have happened.
Yeah.
So it's really, really touched me very deeply. And I'm so grateful I can allow that to happen. So thank you for bringing, I was going to bring it up if
Mhm.
you didn't. Thanks for
Oh,
bringing it up.
good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your heart, Deva.
For me, at first, my first thought was because I've been so aware of how many AI things have come through as, this happened and it really didn't happen, you know.
Mhm.
Um, like even on this is nowhere near what we're talking about, but just for the AI concept, like even on TikTok, it
Mhm.
showed our zoo, which is like number 2 or 3 in the country, right? That it was dead and abandoned. And there were pictures of it with moss and everything like this. And it's like, wow. And then, I mean, you go in the comments and everybody's like, this isn't true. This isn't real. This is AI. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I have been very vigilant of what I take in and believe to the
Mhm.
point where now it's like I don't believe it until I hear like 6 or 7 sources or 8 or 9 or 10, you know what I mean,
Mhm.
really
Mhm.
say that it's true. So at first when this happened, I was like, what? And okay, can I believe this? And then when I heard more of it come up, it's like, what happened? Why? And then all the questions started coming. And I still think I'm in that questioning place of what the heck?
Mhm.
And I'm glad that you talked about how you needed to be spiritually grounded for you,
Mhm.
because that's always been kind of my, like, I'll talk about certain points and certain things and biases.
Mhm.
Um, and the first day back, I came across one of
Mhm.
um, one of my board members actually, and I had to talk to them about it. And for me, that's where the groundwork is. That's where I need to be, is to help this community get their head around not everybody looks like you, thinks like you, and feels like you. And at the same point, it's okay. You don't
Mhm.
have to make everybody conform so that you're comfortable.
Mhm.
And so um, for me right now, that's where I'm at.
Mhm.
And yes, this is horrible. And at the same time, I feel like it's going to shift a lot of things forward to for the better. At least that's what I'm manifesting, that this is going to get better, not worse. And it might get worse before it gets better. Who knows? But I do feel like it's a shift in everything. So that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's you said like you kind of went off tangent but it's not really because part of like not knowing what we can believe, what we see in the media versus the things that are happening that are truly unbelievable. It leaves us in that constant sort of state of chaos and not knowing what can be trusted, what we can trust. So I think it's really on point. It's part of the greater sort of pain body of fear that is, gripping our country. So thank you for naming it. Carol or Raina Shay?
There, I hope that will stay
Yeah.
on
Yes.
unmute. Well, it's really a trying time. I was just in talking to our minister. I'm at long-term LUT here in Columbia, Missouri, and always been the pillar of strength for everyone, and so I went in saying, I need some support. I'm not coping with my life very well right now with everything, and I'm kind of in denial, and so I just really feel that supporting all of us spiritual leaders is really important. We need support too.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's all
Yeah.
I'm going to say. And so I thought really got
Yeah.
to get back into these Thursdays because I think this is a
Yeah.
great support group in all of these issues that we're really all working through our own
Mm-hmm.
privilege and bias and how much can I give to a neurodiverse type person and
Mm-hmm.
just all these things that we have to find our own center about. So I appreciate this type of seminar.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Carol. Yeah, absolutely. As spiritual leaders, we, put on your own oxygen mask first, find your grounding first, fill your cup first, like self-care and, I'm not just talking about the bubble baths and, taking a walk, but also take a walk and take a bubble bath. I mean, really, but really dig deep and find what is it that is going to calm your nervous system and what is your relationship with your nervous system and how are you navigating words, talking about, Renee being a martyr, talking about, this being, this is a significant point on the path of whatever path we are on as a nation, and really globally. I mean, we've never been in a state of global connection, through technology, through social media and all of that, as we are now. And so it's not just, our country that is impacted by this. And of course, we have everything that's going on with Venezuela at the same time. So it's like, which fire do we tend? Which, you know, and how do we, like, I don't think we are necessarily, it's not natural for us to have to hold an awareness of so much, right? So it's, we have created the technology to have awareness and connection in these ways. Um, but, how do we balance that with our organic being, with our divinity, with our humanity? And knowing when it's okay to just turn everything off, turn within, or turn all the news off, but watch some Netflix, or like finding the balance, go sitting by a river, touching the trees, touching the grass, all of those things, and to know that as we tend to our own spiritual well-being, that it's not turning our back on the massive wildfire, that we're tag teaming, that we've got to trust the tag team, that there are so many people who truly do care and, really think the majority of people want the highest good for all. We keep seeing that in these massive No King's Day protests. We keep seeing them. People who you don't expect to be out there are out there, really holding the candle for light. So, being able to trust each other in that way and trust our own calling and our own wisdom to carry us through. Raina Shay, do you want to add anything? Okay. And one of my responses this morning, and I was kind of trembling as I was writing it, but this person was, talking about just the hopelessness and really identifying, seeing herself in this person, and and in a prayerful state, I kind of, started talking about metabolizing our fear and metabolizing what we are witnessing, and trusting that we can, and that we can do that in a way that leads to more compassion and more inspiration and more groundedness. Um, and that as we do that, we can also hold the connection with her soul, because as we know, we are all one, that then that death is not in vain, right? That we can connect to that. And I love, Dave, I think it was you that called out her last name, Good. You know, she is a martyr. She is an angel. And there's also, like, in the bigger picture of the spiritual realm, if we trust her soul and the role that she chose to play at a soul level in this dynamic, does not take away from the pure terror and horror of what happened, but it helps us who are still here in the earthly realm find a path towards hopefulness and out of the despair and helplessness of it all. That here she created a turning point. She created, ironic turn of phrase, she created an opportunity, an awakening, a great awakening, I hope, in our nation, for us to really put a stake in the ground. Like, this is crossing a line that we cannot cross. Um, and if we shrink away into our fear, if we shrink away into our overwhelm, then we miss that opportunity to say, no, like, stop. And I think there's, part of me that, the trembling as I'm writing that out is too, it's like, I feel like I feel that way every time there's a school shooting or some kind of mass shooting. It's like, this, like, enough, hashtag enough. Like, that hashtag's been around for more than 10 years, and we haven't had enough. I mean, collectively, that's the reality that we are in. And so to hold, that this is a marathon, that the work that we are called to do is a marathon. And how do we, you don't just take some water and a few stretches, that's a sprint. Like a marathon, you are pacing yourself, you are stopping for nourishment and for bio needs, like you're addressing the whole mechanics of our being, mind, body, and spirit. There's the psychological aspect, and that's what this is. And so to really tap into self-compassion as well as compassion among each other. And for people who, go to the sort of rhetoric of like, well, she shouldn't have been driving away. That's classic threat to law enforcement. There is that idea out there that is really hard to manage. And, what I come back to is like, yeah, that's not punishable by death. It's just not in this country. And so, like, and I don't have to shout that back. I don't have to present that and match the anger with it, but the clarity. So just finding how we can stay in our clarity, but with strength, with boldness. And for some of us who, have maybe more vulnerabilities, knowing when it's okay to just step back. So thank you for the conversation. I think it's a really beautiful way to lead us into the topic for today, about context. Let me get situation here. Okay, so don't put me in a box. There we go. So what is context in this context, and why do I love to start with it? Because our own context, we all come in a context, our social identities, the generation we were born into, the family systems we were born into, socioeconomic status, race, all of those, identifiers, the who, what, where, and why about us that come into play of how we shape our paradigm of the world, our religious upbringing or lack thereof, stories that are told in our communities and in our families that shape how we see the world, how we see other people, those who we identify as others, and how we see ourselves. And so to really increase our competency in DEIJB conversations, the more clarity we can have around even just naming our own context and working through the good, the bad, and the ugly of it, the more we can make ourselves available with and for others in these same conversations, when things like bias come up in ministry, because I think, in any family system, which churches are, spiritual communities are, we're always sort of bumping up against our own ideas of who I am and who you are. Even in the same family system, kids who are raised by the same parents in the very same way, even in the same generation, can have two completely different stories about that upbringing and two completely different experiences about it. So the more that we can really unpack our own context and heal what needs to be healed, the more we can really show up with and for each other and accept, with and for each other. But I am a unique and repeatable expression of the one holy presence in the universe. You can't name my context. You can't just reduce me to these social identities. And that is true. However, our lived experience tends to be that we reduce ourselves and each other to context. We make all kinds of assumptions immediately. What do you ask when someone tells you they're expecting a baby? Is it a boy or a girl? You're starting to build context already, and it's not a sin, right? So we're not doing anything wrong. It's how our brains operate. It's how the ego mind operates to perpetuate survival, right? We want to know. It's how we create safety. When we can understand the world around us and the people around us, then we find our safety, or we know to get out of there because it's not safe. So it's that constant working with, not against, that which is natural to our being. So yes, we are a unique and unrepeatable expression of the one holy presence in the universe. And also we got stories, we got context. Let's see. So your identity doesn't put you in a box. It offers named space for understanding. And that's a new phrase I want to keep bringing forward, that it's about naming space. We have, I'm Gen X, and part of the Gen X story is don't put me in a box, right? Don't label me. I'm just leave me alone, actually, right? That's the Gen X kind of vibe. But I think it's really important for us to name our experiences, our ideas, our assumptions, because when we can do that, we can create a named space for understanding. So there's no, there's always like fighting the urge or of reducing people to labels, right? Knowing that the label is just part of it, right? It's just a name. We do this with the divine, spirit, God, universe, creator, divine mind, all of these names for that which I think we would all agree is unnameable, but we still name it, right? So I think if we can just sort of loosen that, where we don't get really rigid in the labels that we are using. I think also society right now, just culturally, at least in this country, we are generally recognizing spectrum, the idea of spectrum, which helps us to loosen the ideas of labels. We know that if we say a lesbian woman, there are many shades of lesbian, there are many shades of woman, and so I think collectively we are kind of already loosening those labels up. I think, there may be like this idea too that we just let them all go because they're not functional. But I think we use language to express what we're trying to, communicate with each other. And so it's okay. And I want to create that safe space for doing that. It also gives us something to work with. So the ingredients of your social identity, and I'm going to ask you to think about this for you: your race, your age, your ethnicity, your gender, your sexuality, your disability status, your socioeconomic status, including access to healthcare, your geographic location, your education, your family structure, family of origin, and current family, your hobbies, your beliefs, your career, your experiences. I mean, the list could go on, but this is your context. All of these things about you have shaped to a degree who you are. You may feel like, well, actually, I've had to overcome, this particular context, and I don't claim that anymore. And that's fine. Still, it's part of your story. It's part of your journey. It's part of, who you are. And the more we can name these things about ourselves, the more comfort we cultivate in our own being of having these conversations with others. So when we've done anti-racism groups in my community, always comes up, well, I don't know what to say. Do I say African American, or do I say Black, or do I say POC or BIPOC? I don't know what's the correct thing to say, right? And there's always like this, like, not quite a whisper, but just tiptoeing up to the question. Um, so the more we can name things, and right, wrong, or what indifferent, the more comfortable we can be in that question of, like, do you want me to say queer? Do you want me to say lesbian? What are your pronouns? My pronouns are, she, they. What are your pronouns? Like, we don't have to tiptoe around creating comfort with each other, right? That actually breeds more discomfort, because it's like, I'm afraid to say it wrong, and I'm afraid you're going to judge me. Well, how does that feel for the person on the receiving end of that? Like, they don't have safety to just answer the question. They're not sure. Now they have to take care of the one who's asking the question. So, like, we could just loosen those dynamics the more we just get comfortable saying, look, I grew up in a poor family. For me, this is real. I grew up in a poor family, but my mom graduated from college the year I graduated, or the year before I graduated from high school. So my brothers, who are 8 and 10 years younger than me, grew up in a middle class family, maybe even upper middle class for the area that they were in family. Two parents, my stepdad worked his way up in his company from, really the ground floor up, into the executive realm of that company. So my brothers had a very different experience in that. And, as much as I would say, well, then I went to college and I was a grown up. Well, we know that's not exactly true. It was many years, arguably many, many years before I was a full-fledged grown-up. So I still had the benefit of that shift. I still had more opportunities available to me than I would have had with the same socioeconomic status that I had as a young child. So, like, just being able to, like, just name that, and without judgment to my parents or, to society for how I was received in different ways, but being able to name that helps me find my ground. And it also helps me remember where to have compassion for people in who are having their own experiences right now, because I can tap into what has been mine, or I can open to curiosity if there's something that I just know nothing about. I don't know what it's like to be raised on an island, to live on an island where you're surrounded by water, and, you don't have access to every single kind of product. You don't go to the big box stores. It's just, things are very different. How time is kept. I was recently introduced to the term polychronic time, like, where time is suggested. We'll meet at 8. It might be 9 or 10, a little bit that's culturally relevant to me, but, like, to have it named means something different. There's a validity to it that helps validate all of our experiences, so that we don't have to move through these conversations, being hijacked by the fear or taboo of different things. Is anything coming up for you that you want to name as we share about that, or as you're thinking through these different identifiers? Okay, so what's your story? Who are you? How do you know that that's who you are? Did someone tell you? Did your grandmother tell you who you are, and that just went into your mind and stuck? Did seminary tell you who you are? Did a congregant tell you who you are? you know, is your inner voice loudly telling you who you are? Is it true what it's saying? Who are you, and how do you know? What brings you joy? What motivates you? What is your relationship to yourself? What is your relationship to the divine? What is your relationship to community? All of this plays into your context. We talk about people who are neurodivergent, who maybe don't have big social circles, but perhaps have big points of impact in the few places where they are interfacing with people. So, what is your experience in community? What is your internal and interior experience, your soul experience with spirituality? All of this feeds into the context um, that we move in, exist in. We are one and we accept everyone, right? So it doesn't matter what anybody's labels are. It doesn't matter what anyone's story is. We love them up and we accept them. Yes, at our best, we do in unity. That is our culture. And we are also a movement comprised of people. People with strong opinions, people with movable opinions, people, with their own context, their own stories, their own degrees of healing and messiness and health and clarity and all of the things. So we are one and we do strive to accept everyone in that oneness. And for anyone who's new or newly listening to the recording, that is the B, that is the anchor of the B in DEIJB, belonging. That is our radical oneness. That if we are one, then we all belong. And I think that concept, I think we could all agree, breaks down at some point when we come across someone who we don't want to be one with. We don't want to belong with. We don't want them to belong with us. I mean, when we're watching these videos of the ICE agents in their jeans and masks, and, are we in oneness with them? I won't make you say it. But, I, especially as spiritual leaders, these are the questions that are, coming forward, especially at times such as these, that people want to hear. I'm going into, as maybe some of you are too, the next 2 weeks, we're doing the Unity's 5 Principles, kind of a beginning of the year refresher. And, Principles 1 and 2 this Sunday, and I'm like, and I don't know when you went through seminary, but when we did, the classic question was, Hitler, do you see the Christ in Hitler? And it's like, well, like we can update that. We can update that example. And, how do we shy away from or lean into those conversations and reconcile our theology, reconcile our spiritual existence and our truth? I don't know why it keeps going into. I think it's because I'm not in slideshow mode. Sorry about that. So why does context matter? We're one. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. But when we understand our own unique identities, we learn from and connect with each other outside of our assumptions. So it's a way to shake free. I don't know personally. Tell me if you have an experience. I don't know if we can ever lose our assumptions. Um, I don't have that experience yet. I make them. Again, I think that's our brains are wired for as part of our survival, right? To create categories, to learn from past experiences and protect ourselves from what that might bring in the future. But the more we can really understand our own identities, the more we can be in named space just personally and then in family systems and in community, then we can really shake those assumptions. We hold them just a little more lightly, just a little more loosely, so that when we meet someone who defies all of our assumptions, that we are ready to actually meet them and see them as they are rather than as we think they are. And that's always, the spiritual opportunity. So here's an example about context. Consider a unique lived experience of two women, a cisgender white woman and a Black transgender woman. Both experiences being valid and valuable to society, yet the discrimination they each face differs greatly in terms of privilege and social capital. Social capital being the privilege that's carried through connections. So people who are in higher socioeconomic status are going to have more social connections to get a job, more leads, to get into a better program, and those kinds of things. So that's social capital. So then we add the nuance of socioeconomic status, education, employment, healthcare status, all of those other things that were on the list. That really creates then even more varieties of the lived experiences of these two women. And so, while we want to tend to put like major categories, the same way we do with religion, the Buddhists, the Christians, the Muslims, and there's all kinds of variations within those. Same with a woman. It's not enough to say women who, or women are, or women this. But when we start to put all of those details and nuances, we have women with very different lived experiences about femininity, about their own womanhood, and about their own identity in relationship to community. Anything coming up for you in that? Yes, Deva.
The labeling piece is something I ran into delightfully yesterday in working with a congregant who'd asked me to work with her. We've been working a couple of weeks, and I have experienced her in group situations as frozen, not very emotive, and she will say things kind of sharply. And if we get to a tender place, she always goes, "It's just, our sacred contract." And several people have left a group because of her behavior. So when she asked if I'd work with her, I kind of went, okay. And what I have learned is she has had many more losses than most people have, all of her life long. And so we've looked at those. She came to work on anxiety. And so yesterday she shared that she had been labeled ADD. And my brain went, aha. And so I asked her, how all these losses, how does that transform you? And she said, I'm very empathic. And which, does not show. And I said, well,
Mm-hmm.
how do you share that with someone? And she says, if they say da 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 da, I say, I've done that too. And I said, what about if you just said something like, that's really hard? And it didn't quite click, but she said, I'm going to try it. And so I had judgments. I still have some about her, but, and I've had judgments about labels, right, for a long
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
But that label came in a shining star and,
Yeah.
illuminated everything. So that was one
I
example.
love that. I love that. It was a shining star and created illumination, and it helped you shift your assumptions, right? And it's so easy if someone comes in breaking social norms, right? Social cues. It's so easy to just be irritated and be upset and how dare they? Like to go into those things or to be protective of the people who might be offended or hurt in the moment. We're holding all of that space, especially as spiritual leaders. And so to really, give her space to name ADD, a person with a long history of perpetual loss, and so I have deep empathy. And maybe behind that, she's saying, I don't know what to do with those feelings. I don't know what to do when I'm feeling with someone. So I say, I've done that too. Point of connection, the desire is connection, and it's, when we can slow down enough to realize what's happening and understand what's happening, then that's where we get to real connection. But when we stay stuck in the assumptions that we're carrying, then we don't name things, then we stay stuck, right? And then we are disconnected. Yeah, very great example. Thank you, Deva. Brenda.
Mine was with my board member. We have an office assistant now that we've hired, and it's someone that I know, and they're younger and they have piercings and colored hair and very vibrant. And two of these piercings they look like fangs. Let's just say that. So my board member came in and said that um, let me get back to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? All right. So again, why does context matter? It creates perspective, which Dava, you just gave a really great example of that. Depth, depth in our connection with each other. When we can understand our own context, then we move away from being a 2D being and we really, expand all of the dimensions of our own um, makeup. It cultivates understanding and empathy. It's just a natural outcome when we can meet it with understanding, when we can meet our context with understanding, then we cultivate more understanding with it for ourselves and with others. And that it impacts our access to equity, justice, and belonging for ourselves and for other people. So that's really important. And that's why we start here. So then when we're interacting with, you know, individuals, if we can know our context, then we are leading with our whole self. Like we understand all that we are bringing to a situation. We understand our own privilege that we're bringing to us. We understand our biases because we're, again, I don't know if we ever lose that. I'll tell you if I learn. But to date, at the age of 51, I don't know if we ever lose those. But we gain the awareness and we increase the awareness, and then we are leading with our whole selves. Like I know that, this is where I tend to make an assumption about this, and I can either name it in the room if that's helpful, or I can just keep it in my awareness and, and notice how much I'm letting that activate curiosity and openness. And then we get to name and claim. David, again, you just gave a great example of being able to name, for this woman, like an opportunity to claim her empathy, but in a way that could be met and received, by someone else. So it's all about that expanding the ways that we are connecting with others, and behind that, the ways that we are willing to connect with each other. In leadership roles, when we are leading with ourselves, it makes us more relevant and relatable. If you can stand in the pulpit and share this level of vulnerability, then people are like, oh, they get me, because we're just not as unique as we think we are. Like, and so it's a lifeline. It becomes a lifeline for someone to see, to hear our own story and to see themselves in it. It's the power of storytelling, which, has, from the beginning of humanity. Are you Papa Bear, Mama Bear, are you Goldilocks? All of the stories, all of our metaphysical interpretation of scripture, is about relevance and relatability. So when we can lead with our whole selves and our vulnerability in that, and our competency to name our context, then we are creating more relevance and more relatability for ourselves. We get to demonstrate shared values. Like, here's something I had to overcome. Maybe you were raised in a racist family. I was raised in a Mexican family, and my grandmother was the darkest skinned person in among her, like, I think 9 siblings. And they made fun of her. She was also like the second to the youngest, and they made fun of her as a kid for being so dark. They called her terrible names. So she spent her whole adulthood avoiding the sun and slathered in sunscreen. And so I grew up with that message that dark skin is bad. Well, I'm pretty fair skinned, but as a kid, when I'm out in the sun, like I tan very darkly, and she was constantly covering me with sunscreen and telling me I should wear long sleeves and, put a hat on and trying to help me be better. That was her story. By the same token, she would say really terrible things about white people. So these are things that I've had to work through, messages that I received, early on, and like, what are my values? Like, what are my values, and how do I navigate those values among the experiences of privilege, the experience of discrimination, power and powerlessness, and all of those things. But when we can demonstrate that we are authentically on our own journey, we can also then communicate where we can find that connection of shared value. So even if we don't understand each other, if we have a shared value of community, then we can anchor in there and figure it out. And then we impact inclusivity through accessibility. So if we can understand how the context of different people and different ways that their context impact people's accessibility to healthcare, to spirituality. I mean, I've used this example as such a good example, the deaf community. We use an ASL interpreter for everything we do. That still really only creates accessibility for the deaf folks, right? They get access to our spiritual teachings. They don't necessarily get access to community. Like I learned this last year, on my journey to really try to create a hybrid deaf hearing space at our church, um, that when there was kind of like the rumor mill was going about something, um, the deaf community doesn't have access to the rumor mill in the same way the hearing community does, right? There's a breakdown unless somebody in the deaf community gets wind of it through an interpreter or something and then shares it with the rest. There's like this breakdown of just access to something like that, to like what's happening in the room, what are the whispers in the room. And it was really eye-opening to me, to understand that through the lens of accessibility, like what happens in social spaces. It's not just about, can I get into the building and can I use the bathroom? Can I understand through an interpreter? But what are the other nuances of accessibility? So the more we can identify these things about ourselves, the more we become open, and receptive to all of these deeper nuances, which then leads us back to creating more connection and more community. So practical
Did you
application in ministry.
did you
Yes, ma'am?
come up with a solution to that?
Yeah, I went and told a couple of the folks in the deaf community who were there that day what was happening.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that was it. And then I just note to self in the future if there's something going on to just make a direct communication, knowing that they're not gonna hear it through the conversations at hospitality. Yeah, yeah. Practical applications in ministry, curiosity, openness, willingness, the gateways, right? I mean, we teach these. Um, Accessibility, spiritual, physical, financial. And I should add social to that. I'm going to do that right now. Belonging, specific belonging over general, like all people are welcome here. All you, square pegs come fit into this round hole. We're happy to have you. Like, no, we can get specific. And these are the specific ways that we are creating a sense of belonging for people in these specific lived experiences. Um, Impact. We demonstrate the oneness principle, like true radical oneness. That's the greatest impact. We get to live out the truth that we preach. And always, always, we make it a cultural practice within ourselves and with our community, with our staff, with our leaders, to check our assumptions. Like we just create that competency. And I just keep using that word, that this is really a competency, because it can feel overwhelming. It can feel like a whole different way of being or moving or operating, but really it's just about competency. It's learning the language and getting really comfortable with, saying, I think I have an assumption here. I have not checked. And so I'm going to reflect on that later, but let's continue with the meeting. It can just be that simple. We don't have to make big, great sins out of things, or, and then if we hide it, right, then that's when we have a tendency to really step in it and make it worse, right? Or pretend it's not there. But we can just get really comfortable naming it, then we're creating that comfort within our community and within our congregation. And all of those people go out into the world and carry that with them. And they're then impacting their social circles, their places of employment, so on and so forth. And access, well, that's the same slide. Oh, removing oppressive barriers, creating resources. And then all of this, here we go, systemic change. That's what we want, right? It's, but if we started the system, it's overwhelming. Like, what can we do with this great big system? But if we just break it down to what can I do? And then what can I do in my work? What can I do in the community? Then all of that, we trust the aggregate result and impact of that. So where's your growing edge? Out of all the things we covered today, really think about, where's your growing edge? Is it really just getting your own clarity about your context? Like being willing to name things that perhaps you have not wanted to name, or that you've been afraid of, you've pushed into your own shadow? Are you willing to even name your shadow? To what degree are you willing to get clear about your context and allow that work to not create shame, or insecurity or any of that crap, but to really cultivate the openness and curiosity and the empathy, so that you can look anew at the people around you or new people coming into your community, with checking your assumptions and really considering the context of what's coming before you. So any first thoughts? Brenda, I see your hands.
Yeah. Okay. So we had a bias. Someone had a bias and it was negative, and it went from um, how somebody looked to, well, I don't know if one day they're going to come in and shoot up the place. Wait a minute. So we had a conversation. I said, this is a deeper spiritual conversation. Let's sit down. So we did. And I said, okay, I have skulls all around my office. I have a huge skull tattoo. How is that any different? And they said, well, I know your heart. And I said, exactly. So take time to get to know someone that does not look like you. I said, and if we're about changing people so that we feel comfortable, then we need to take down everything that says you're welcome here, you belong here. You know, we welcome everybody. Let's take it all down then, because that's not who we are if we're doing that. And at one point there was a comment said, well, you can't, I'm not going to change how I feel. I said, that's fine. And I'm not going to ask them to change either, because I'm not asking you to change. So why would I ask them?
Mm.
And so it ended up good, you know, in the long run, but really showed me there's tons more teaching that needs to be had, because the generations that are coming up do not look like us. And thank God.
Right? Oh my gosh.
I'm like,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for
Mm-hmm.
expressing yourself. Thank you for being
Mm-hmm.
you, because it's what's needed in this world. And so, at least that's my opinion. And so, I can't grow this unity if you're going to tie my hands to only people that look like you.
Yep. Yep.
So,
So good. So good. Thank you for being in that conversation. Rena Shea.
What you said about your experience with the deaf community at your center really stimulated some thoughts in me. And I mean, everything you've said today has been really stimulating, actually. For myself, I've struggled with naming myself as having disability, because that hasn't always been the case in my life. At least it was. I have health challenges. I have an autoimmune disease. I'm immunocompromised. I've developed mobility issues that I didn't previously have. Um, and I've developed lung issues. So I have to take oxygen with me. And the reason I'm sharing all this is that in the center, the Unity Center that I used to attend after the pandemic, I was not, and still today, I don't go out in public very much. And I haven't been to a church or a center in several years. And I myself, in the meantime, I've become a licensed Unity teacher and an interfaith, interspiritual minister, and I'm wanting to create community online, and do, all of my ministry is going to be online. And I'm thinking about how a lot of churches and centers have gone online in the sense of streaming their services or even holding their services like as a Zoom interaction, but there's still a lot that's missed for someone like myself who can't show up at the church. And I basically was relieved of my position as the lead of the prayer team because I couldn't show up at the church and do things that were assumed were part of that role. And I haven't really dealt with that. So some of that's coming up right now. I'm realizing in this moment. But it makes me, it's just prompting a lot of thoughts about accessibility is more than just live streaming your service
Right.
or saying, oh, you can come to our service via Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more to being a part of a church community
Mm-hmm.
than just live streaming the service.
So much more. I mean, when I was hired at UCOP, they've had years and years of ASL interpreters on Sunday service, but not for anything else. So the deaf community could not participate in any of the special services, any classes, any events, any workshops. And that was a huge gap because then that's not truly an accessible space. It's an accessible Sunday service, but it's not bringing people into community, right? And, and I really appreciate what you're saying, especially those non-visible disabilities, where, what do we expect? How do we define our leadership roles? Even the conversation of having virtual members, right? It's taken almost all of my 5 years to convince my board that we aren't trying to get our live streamers to come into the building. Great if they do, if they want to, always welcome, of course, because we welcome everyone. But our goal is not to pressure them, and our tactic is not to pressure them. That may be the exact experience they need. They may not be able to come in. They may be out of the country. They may be, physically unable for any number of reasons, emotionally unable, due to caretaking of whoever's in the makeup of their home. And there are all kinds of reasons, transportation, on and on and on. Neurodivergence, being in a space with other people, and the ways that we format our service, there are all kinds of reasons. Job related, if they work on Sunday morning or Thursday nights when the chaplains meet, whatever, so how do we really loosen up our assumptions about how roles are created and how the experience of spiritual community is created? Like what side doors, right, are we allowing to be main doors for people? So good. I really appreciate that perspective, and I'm sorry for the hurt that came up. I imagine that was
Well, I
pretty
really want to
painful.
I really want to give it a lot more thought, and I'm open
Mhm.
to ideas and your expertise on how that could have been done differently.
Yeah.
And in my own ministry, thinking about um, that level of inclusivity
Hmm. Yeah.
that I don't really have answers right now, but it's a
Well, and I
conversation
think
I want
too, and it
to
crosses
have.
over with trauma-informed ministry because there's so much trauma that is created when people are not given a path to belonging or
Mm,
access.
yeah.
And so we're also like, to me, it that's the language I can use to help cultivate understanding in people who are like, why would we do that? Or it's going to cost money. And it's like, okay. Okay, so let's talk about it. Like, how do we unpack, the trauma of that? And if that can be the goal, then it helps to me pave a softening towards creativity, right? But we can talk about that. Would be such a great conversation at our next Thursday session, which is January 22nd. And your homework is to explore your context with one or two people. So sharing it, like getting practice naming your context and inquiring about theirs. Like it doesn't have to be a long conversation. It could be over a cup of tea, it could be a phone call, but I really encourage you to do that. And then take action towards your growing edge, personally or professionally. It may be enough, to just do that. And as always, these are not graded assignments, but just hopefully you're bringing it back to our next sessions for the reflection, which will not be recorded. So if you're watching this recording and you want to join us on the 22nd, we would love to have you with us in real time, but that won't be recorded. And then in February, a season for nonviolence kicks off. We're going to talk about spiritual practice and inner violence, which I think will flow really well from this because we do so much of that. So thank you each of you for your wisdom, for your heart, and for your willingness to show up for these conversations. You bless me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. I appreciate it.
All right.